Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And, of course, you can visit us online at virginiainstitute.org. And I know it's not Giving Tuesday, or I don't know if this day even has a hashtag, but if you gave and helped us out on Giving Tuesday for the work we do, we deeply appreciate it. If you haven't yet, please support the cause in any way, shape, or form. Just, a couple of bucks here and there, even do it as a regular thing. You can even make us the beneficiary of your Amazon shopping going into the holiday season. Of course, we are a nonpartisan organization, so our first segment this week is going to be more of the investigation of what's coming next. We're not taking partisan sides in an election, but we want the conservative principles of life, liberty, property to continue to be foremost in the Commonwealth, and the man who's tasked with making a lot of that happen in many of these races is going to be chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, Rich Anderson. Rich, first and foremost, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and how are you doing, sir?
Oh, doing just fine. Had a great Thanksgiving. It was a one-day respite from the phone calls, the emails, the text messages, all about the results of the latest election and the aftermath of that, and then where does the party head off to in 2021. So it was a restful Thanksgiving.
Well, I know that the Virginia GOP, virginia.gop is the website, richanderson.com as well. You've spent many years in the Virginia House of Delegates. First, let's focus on what's coming up in 2021. The entire House of Delegates, all the seats will be up for re-election there. Have you been approached by folks who would like to run? I've said in the past it's frustrating to see so many conservative voices want to run for Congress and the Senate, and I get so frustrated that I can't get House of Delegates and school board and Board of Supervisors seats for candidates. Have you heard from folks who are interested in 2021 in the General Assembly?
Yes. It's amazing you asked that question, because just yesterday I had one voicemail and two emails from individuals at various places around the Commonwealth who wish to compete for the Republican nomination for the House of Delegates seat in their local areas. I have been very vocal about this since I began a campaign for election as chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia back in January. And a number of key points that I hit about party reforms included never, ever again leaving anything on the field of political battle, because, as you know, in 2019, there were some 36 seats between the House and Senate here in Virginia that had no Republican candidate running for whatever reason, and that's simply unacceptable. You can never win a battle for which you don't march the troops on the field. You'll miss 100% of the balls you fail to swing at. So my intention, my goal, and the party goal is to run a Republican candidate in every one of the 100 House of Delegate seats, and it makes no difference if it's deep red Virginia, deep blue Virginia, or somewhere in between.
Well, people forget there was this fellow named Cuccinelli that for many years represented Northern Virginia in the Virginia Senate, and so it isn't like it was all that long ago that this was possible, Rich. As conservative voices go, it also, you don't have to be a member of the Machiavelli family to understand that if you're competing against somebody in their district, they can't send money to their neighboring district to help bolster the campaign of somebody else.
That's very important. I mean, you run a candidate in a given seat, then there is a companion Democrat who has to defend that seat, whether they're an incumbent or whether they are a challenger. And so for that reason, we need to run somebody in every seat. That's an important part of building a deep bench, because whether a Republican candidate wins or loses in a particular district, he or she has stepped through a process of rigor and vigor in the whole nomination and election process that prepares them, if they don't win, for later battles. And if they do win, it prepares them for follow-on elections in that particular jurisdiction. So running a candidate in every jurisdiction is absolutely crucial to building the bench.
There was a story that a Virginia Democrat had said that her party needed to start going after rural Virginia for new voters to grow their party. And I feel like some of that may be based in the fact that the president has shown some success in winning over urban voters from what had long been Democratic strongholds. Talk about existentially a conservative that's approaching you to run for the House of Delegates in what has been an urban area, probably predominantly blue, but to make the case about poverty and overcoming poverty and criminal justice reform and all the things that are truly conservative principles.
Yeah, absolutely. They're conservative principles. And for one who is a student of the Republican creed, it's very evident in that public statement of what we believe. It is our testimony to what defines us as a Republican Party of Virginia. It is absolutely crucial that we run people in these bluer areas, these more liberal areas of the state, which have been reliably liberal for a number of years, because I believe that with the right messaging, the right candidate, the right resources, we make headway there. We're a party whose president, the leader of our party over the last 4 years, has done more for criminal justice reform than any Democrat or Republican president in modern memory. That is an excellent model on which we can build.
What about the issue of vote integrity? I have a spreadsheet that shows me how many Dominion voting machines are in use in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and though nobody has made those assertions, I've also been shown ballots cast by decedents in Virginia, and as always, it is considered to be not significant enough to overturn any particular election. But talk about the issue of voter integrity. Rich Anderson, chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, is here. The governor just announced that he wants to start selling marijuana and will require a photo ID to buy legal marijuana if it becomes that way in Virginia, but you don't need one to vote. It just seems like I don't understand why it's racist to ask for photo ID to vote, but not to sell marijuana to somebody.
Or get on an airplane, or to do any of the number of thousands of things that every citizen, regardless of socioeconomic station in life, has to do.
Or get into the Pocahontas building.
To find simple human logic.
Yeah. I mean, just to get into the Pocahontas building in Richmond, you need to show photo ID.
That's right. Let me talk about a few things regarding the contention over this recent election, which is not through. Mm-hmm. President Trump has stood for us, and we will continue to stand for President Trump. His policy outcomes have been absolutely unsurpassed. And if he is not reelected, if he does not take the oath on January 20th of 2021, we will feel that with the regression to these Obama-era policies that were so damaging to families, to businesses, to communities at large. And so it's vitally important that we move through this thing in the remaining days we have. President Trump deserves his day in court. I think what everyone should remember is that America gave Al Gore 35 days to press his case. Mm-hmm. We are not there yet with President Trump. So in fairness and simple equity, he needs to be able to make his case. He's doing that. Tonight, my wife and I are going to the White House for a function with some of our Republican colleagues, and I'm hoping that we will hear more from President Trump while we're at the White House tonight. But here in Virginia, we have a lot of concerns about voter integrity, about voter confidence in the system, and about these outcomes. Across the country in these half dozen or so battleground states, President Trump and his legal team are pressing this case. We will see how all that turns out. There are sworn affidavits that all of us who have watched any media reports have seen, and they certainly seem to be credible. Closer to home here in Virginia, here's how I look at it as the state party chair. To date, I have not had laid in my lap large numbers of sworn statements by witnesses to en masse voter fraud on the scale that we have seen in other states. But regardless of that, we have what I think is a dysfunctional voter, let's just say marginally effective system of elections here in Virginia. One of the issues, and you mentioned it a little earlier, Joe, had to do with Dominion voting machines. Here's what I know about Dominion's voting systems, voting machines here in Virginia. There are 133 voter jurisdictions, and of those 133, 30 purchased and used the Dominion machines. One of our local unit chairs, who is part of an election integrity task force that is underway here under the umbrella of the Republican Party of Virginia, did an analysis of the votes that were cast in those 30 jurisdictions that use the Dominion voting machines. And the numbers that I have been provided is that President Trump earned 58% of the vote in those jurisdictions, and Mr. Biden earned 40%. So 58 to 40% in favor of President Trump. That validates, at least for me, that there was no opportunity, if that has occurred in these other states, no opportunity in Virginia for there to be votes changed by a remote controller of any kind. And that's because I'm aware of this from my delegate days and visiting voting locations when machines several days before elections were being set up and calibrated and validated. None of the machines in Virginia have modems or are connected to the Internet. And additionally, as I've been reading in the media in these other states, some of these Dominion machines used a software called Smartmatic, and I'm certainly not smart in all that. I'm not a technical guy in these sorts of disciplines. But in Virginia, none of the machines use the Smartmatic software. So, to come more to the point of answering your question, there has been considerable erosion in Virginia in the last year under these Democrat majorities in the General Assembly and in the governor's mansion that has eroded ballot integrity and as a result has eroded voter confidence. Such things as you mentioned it, the revocation of a voter photo ID requirement. They eliminated the requirement for a witness signature on mail-in ballots. They attempted, the State Board of Elections, which is highly partisan in my view, and has been, and was validated as such in 2018, November 2018, just 2 years ago, by JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, as being overtly partisan in the way it transacted its business. I don't think that has changed. I have not seen evidence of reforms that have produced that sort of change. But they attempted to drop the requirement that mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, have to display a postmark if they're received all the way through noon on Friday after Election Day. They attempted that by a regulation to be passed by the State Board of Election, which would have changed Virginia state law. The Republican Party of Virginia went to court over that. We won that, and postmarks had to appear on those mail-in ballots. Drop boxes for ballots, some in secure locations, some in what are insecure locations, and therefore vulnerable to tampering. That is absolutely a non-player. So all of these procedural irregularities, to include no Republicans present when absentee ballots were being counted, multiple ballots in multiple jurisdictions in Virginia being mailed to the same person, so an individual might have gotten 2 ballots. Well, those are votable, negotiable, hot ballots. It's like throwing gift cards on the ground. They have value, and they can be...
Yeah, they're live.
So what we need next year is, I believe, in January on all of these dysfunctions, the takeaway is there needs to be hearings on these dysfunctions, and these most recent reforms passed by a Democrat-dominated General Assembly that did so in a COVID environment where the public had marginal input, and in fact the Republican caucus only had marginal opportunity to speak to these issues in the virtual House floor. We need reforms. We need legislation. This governor needs to sign it in the interest of ballot integrity.
Rich, talk about the procedure of how to do that, because it looks like Speaker Fillercorn has got the committees set in such a way that most of the stuff isn't even going to get to the floor for a up or down vote.
Right. Well, as the majority party, obviously she controls that. I know Eileen very well. We served in the House of Delegates during my entire time there together, and the way it is being administered, I'm very disappointed in. I get her politics. We have a different belief system between the two of us, but they have turned away under her speakership from the time-honored 4 centuries old tradition in Virginia about public input. I chaired a standing House committee, the House Committee on Science and Technology, and if they wanted to, a 15-year-old could walk in off the street, walk to the podium, and testify on a bill and make their personal input. Today, that cannot happen. It's been happening under these COVID protections, and I believe that the other party has simply weaponized it for political gain. We need to be cautious, of course, because there are vulnerable populations that will have very adverse and dangerous and possibly life-threatening reactions. But that said, there are common sense precautions we can take and resume normal legislative life on Capitol Square.
Oh, absolutely. What about the governor's executive privilege or executive orders that have given him really one-man control over Virginia under the emergency declaration that has no expiration? What can be done about that, if anything, short of winning the governor's mansion and the House of Delegates and hopefully changing that rule?
Well, there was legislation this year that was entered, and I don't know by who or which house, but it was entered by a Republican member of the General Assembly to, in fact, rein that in. I personally have cared very little for executive orders, whether they are wielded at the state or federal level by the chief executive, simply because it bypasses the legislative process, the blessing of those two houses that are direct representatives of the people. And it just reneges on every principle we have, every small d democratic principle we have set down in this constitutional republic that has survived for 2.5 centuries. And so the Democrat majorities in the House and Senate and that Democrat sitting over in the executive mansion certainly are not going to change the current process for executive orders. They're not going to change the process for voting unless there is intense public pressure brought to bear, simply because, as they view it, all is right with the world because it accrues not a positive public policy outcome for the state, but it accrues political privilege and advantage.
Rich Anderson is the chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, just took the job this year, and we're talking about some of the plans coming up for 2021. We have a General Assembly, half of the House is up for election, Rich, plus the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general races, not to mention half of most all boards of supervisors, and most school boards are nonpartisan per se of political party, but generally there'll be people who are supported by the local units as well. So there's a lot going on in Virginia in 2021. What about the impact? And the president has polarized in many ways, thanks to the help of the media, but has polarized within the Republican Party. Republicans saying, I don't like him because of the way he tweets or talks, or he's brash. He's often been found to be righteous after the fact, even if people who might not have said it the way he said it. Talk about the folks you're talking to about these races. Are they ready to handle the heat of a media that's just looking upon any Republican as an avatar for President Trump? And how many of them are ready for that challenge?
Well, we'll see how many are ready for any challenge that comes their way once we have nominees for our statewide offices and for our 100 House of Delegates seats. You talk about President Trump's style. President Trump is unlike any president in my lifetime. And I've been around long enough to have seen many presidents since Eisenhower. And so every president brings his own style. This is a president who is a fighter. This is a president who looks at the radicalized left that has attacked him incessantly. He talked about impeachment even before he took the oath of office on January 20th, 2017. That's how embedded this visceral dislike for him was, and buttressed by the president likes to call it fake news. I call it a biased, compromised media that fails to fulfill the role envisioned by the founders. And so I say look at a president's policy outcomes, whether it has been reforms and rejuvenation of a hollowed-out military during the 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration, and that strikes a chord with me. I spent 30 years in the Air Force uniform, and I know a hollowed-out military when I see a hollowed-out military, and those guys hollowed out the United States military. President Trump recovered it. But in international affairs, he carried a big stick, and that is an adage of Teddy Roosevelt, and I think it is the way a president should act. A booming economy, opportunities for marginalized groups that have been marginalized over the last century by Republican and Democrat administrations alike. That's why he garnered the largest minority vote of any president since John Fitzgerald, any Republican president since John Fitzgerald Kennedy. That is pretty impressive. And so I think one needs to look at the policy outcomes. My grandmother always told me, look at what a man or a woman does, not what they say. Mm-hmm. And so you look at what President Trump has done, and it has been a stellar. If there are those who wishes that he would not be a fighter, that he would take a more reticent approach, that will not deter these vicious attacks from the left. And I'll hold up as an example, whether one likes these individuals in political leadership positions, the fact remains they were gentlemanlike. President George Herbert Walker Bush, his son, President Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, all of them, Bob Dole, I mean, you can go back and back, and they were gentlemen in the way they did business. They were eviscerated. And this president, who is a steely-eyed, bare-knuckles, New York businessman, said, hell no. You slap me, I'm going to punch you back. I want a fighter in the White House who will fight for us and fight for America.
Well, I do appreciate it, Delegate. I always call him that. I guess it's Chairman Rich Anderson of the Republican Party of Virginia. Thank you very much for your visit this weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
All right, Joe. Take care. Glad to be on the show.
Coming up next, another one of our favorite folks, again looking towards the General Assembly of 2021, Philip Van Cleve, president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.